to thank you all for coming. It's been a long time getting this together, and I've been doing a lot of work for a long time. For the past 20 years, this is kind of like my PhD thesis. I've been studying this stuff ever since I joined Vets for Peace 20 years ago. I want to just go through my CV first. I was born in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I went to Central High School in 1962, which also happens to be the same high school that Noam Chomsky went to. And I graduated in 62. I went to Coe College in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, which was a Presbyterian school. I graduated with a BA in Business Administration. Then after I graduated, I went to work for Honeywell Corporation in Fort Washington, Pennsylvania. I was there from September 66 to January 68. Then I went into a job in cost accounting at Goldenberg Rosenthal Company. It's in Philadelphia downtown. I was drafted in 1968 in April, 5 days after King was murdered. I enlisted in the Army Security Agency. I entered basic training in Fort Dix, May 28th, 1968, which is the same day that the Shrub went in the Air National Guard. But I finished my full time. He didn't. I went from Fort Dix to Fort Devens in Air Mass, which is where my ASA training school was. I was trained in traffic analysis and radio teletype analysis course. I left there in June of '69, went to the USASA field station in Shitoshi, Hokkaido, Japan. It's a northern island of Japan. I was there for 17 months. I briefly went to a radio research field station, which is what they called ASA in Vietnam and Southeast Asia. When I joined, I was told by the recruiter that you wouldn't go to Vietnam if you joined ASA, but that, of course, was a lie because they just changed the name over there to radio research, and so that's what they called the stations in Vietnam and Thailand. At any rate, I was there for just a couple of months. Then I went to Korea. I was stationed in Pyeongtaek briefly. Then I went to Kangwon-do Island, which is up on the DMZ at the far west end of the river, but at the 38th parallel. They were on the other side. We were on our side. I was there and left there in December of '71. Got out on December 13th. That summer I spent at the University of Wisconsin-Madison with a friend of mine from the Army. I went to summer school, took some courses in chemistry, and got set up to go to medical school. I went to Temple University in Philadelphia, got a psych degree, graduated magna cum laude. I started University of Pennsylvania School of Medicine in September 1974 to '78, and I came to Gainesville. Finally came to Titletown. I've been here ever since, and that's my CV. I've been with this medical group I'm in for 5 years, and it's starting here before I didn't get started, but I want to thank Dr. Price. He had to leave, but I want to thank him for allowing me to have this room to speak. I want to thank my wife Sally for allowing me to do all this stuff, and she was actually kind of supportive, and my daughter Mary, who defends me when my brother calls me a conspiracy theorist, and I want to thank my granddaughter Angelessa, who wants me to run for president. And most of all, I want to thank my cousin Meade and her mother Harriet, who are back together now. Okay, Anthrax is an organism called Bacillus anthracis. It's a gram-positive aerobic and facultative anaerobic organism. It produces toxin called edema toxin and lethal toxin. It's encapsulated. It can grow with or without oxygen. It's transmitted by contact with animals or their products, usually through the skin. Less common and rare are the inhalation, GI, and other sites. It starts with a nonspecific local symptoms followed by, soon after, by severe systemic illness and shock from the toxins. Death comes unless antibiotics are given it soon enough, and the preferred ones are Cipro and doxycycline. The vectors are domestic livestock, wild animals in Africa, hippos, elephants, Cape buffalo. It rarely occurs in humans unless there is a lack of regulation and commercial uses of animal products. So the workers need to be vaccinated or else they can get it. It's also a bacteriological warfare agent. The dry spores, weaponized form, as used in the 9/11 attacks. Weaponized means it's very dispersible. 1 trillion spores per gram was what this anthrax was that was released on 1 week after 9/11. The 10th year anniversary was 2 days ago, and at this time I want to have a moment of silence for the people who died on that day, those days and the days after. There were 5 people who died. I also want to mention the people who died on 9/11. So I'd like a moment of silence for them. Okay. The spores form and the bacilli dry out. The spores can hang around in soil and wool, hides, and so forth for decades until they come in contact with open tissue or a mucosal surface such as the inside of the nose or mouth or GI tract or respiratory tract. Human infection usually acquired through the skin in contact with animals or animal products, rarely ingestion of inadequately cooked meat. Inhalation is one of the most deadly forms, that and the meningeal type, which you would get through an inhalation into the nasal passages and potentially get into the meninges. The spores and bacteria are eaten by white cells in the body called macrophages. They migrate to regional lymph nodes, rapidly multiply, produce toxins which cause the shock and death. They're extremely virulent due to these defense mechanisms that the bacteria have and getting their toxins into cells. The incubation period is 1 to 6 days, but maybe up to 6 weeks. The cutaneous begins with a sore, itchy papule, progresses, ulcerates, gets a large infection, spreads. GI infection ranges from asymptomatic to fatal. Pulmonary starts like the flu and within a few days progresses to a severe respiratory distress, cyanosis, shock, coma, and death. In the pulmonary form, it goes to the central part of the chest called the mediastinum. In the mediastinum are all the central structures of the chest: the heart, thoracic cavity, esophagus, trachea, phrenic nerve, cardiac nerve, thoracic duct, thymus gland, lymph nodes, etc. Diagnosis of this requires a high index of suspicion, i.e. good history taking, which in today's medical environment of HMOs, rising overhead costs, and falling reimbursement, that is not always possible, and that is why the people who caught the anthrax during the attacks died, because there wasn't a high enough index of suspicion for doctors to pick it up, and they caught it too late. People don't go to the doctor when they don't have insurance or don't have money, and so infection rapidly progresses, and then it's too late. Mortality in the pulmonary and meningeal forms are 100% without early antibiotics. It's less so in the other forms of infection. Now there's drug resistance. There are multiple drug-resistant and vaccine-resistant strains being produced by U.S. biowarfare researchers at Battelle Memorial Labs outside of Columbus, Ohio, and Dugway Proving Ground in Utah, which is a military base, It's 80 miles from Salt Lake City. It is larger than the state of Rhode Island. Battelle Memorial Labs is the largest private R&D corporation on Earth. And it runs the biowarfare program at Dugway. There are two types of vaccines, one which has been around for quite a while for veterinarians, and then the newer form which has been used on GIs starting after Gulf War or during Gulf War I and on through. Antibiotics and vaccines are required for known exposure. The U.S. biowarfare program, again, is producing drug and vaccine-resistant strains. And the background information on that is a memo by a man named Barry Kissin, who is an attorney and journalist who lives in Frederick, Maryland, where Fort Detrick is. He knew many people that knew Bruce Ivins. He has been following the U.S. biowarfare program for many years. And if you just Google Barry Kissin memo to Rush Holt, you'll have this whole story of how the cover-up of Amerithrax went. Innocent people died days and weeks after the letters were mailed because spores leaked through the pores in the paper envelopes. The envelopes had been sealed with tape. However, these spore particles were 1.5 to 3 microns in size, which is smaller than the pores in the paper. That is how it got out. It got on other people's mail. They somehow inhaled it and died. Letters were sent to people in the media, to senators, Daschle and Leahy. It went to them. That was the second Amerithrax attack, which was October 9th, I believe. The first one was September 18th, which was a week after 9/11. The second one went to the letters went to Daschle and Leahy because Daschle and Leahy were holding up the Patriot/Traitor Act in Congress. The Senate office building and congressional offices were closed down immediately. They were closed for months to be decontaminated. It took 3 months and millions of dollars to clean that building up. The postal buildings, some of them were just torn down. Others, it took several years for them to be cleaned up. One thing to note is how similar the 9/11/Amerithrax attack were to the Reichstag fire and the Enabling Act. The Enabling Act was passed after the Reichstag fire. The Patriot Act was basically modeled after the Enabling Act. And this is what put the German people under a close approximation of what Stasi was during the East German phase, and what the United States has become after 9/11/Amerithrax. Now, one thing you need to know about the Amerithrax attack and 9/11 is they are deep events. The definition of a deep event is a terror attack, war, or other similar event that is preceded by or occurs at the same time as an exercise or drill that mimics the event. During the exercise or drill, a covert signal occurs and the drill goes live. Now, only a few people in the exercise or drill know what's going on. Most of the people are just participating in a drill or exercise as far as they know, and they're just doing what they're told to do. But a small number of people can take control of it, and that's how these events occur. Examples: invasion of Libya. There was Operation Southland. If you just Google Operation Southland, Libya, you'll come up with this operation that started in the fall of 2010. It was a drill, or rather an exercise with France and Britain on bombing a North African country. On March 19th, the exercise went live and the bombing began. 7/7 in London. The drill then was identical to the bombings. It was in the same tube stations and the same bus line at the very same time as the bombs went off. JFK assassination, there was a drill. MLK assassination, there was a drill. That was handled by the 20th Special Forces Group. The MLK assassination has been solved, and if people want to find out more about that, all you have to do is Google Dr. William Pepper, MLK assassination. You will find in there some interviews, one of which is a video of his book release at a place called Moe's Bookstore, which is in Berkeley. It's slightly over 2 hours. He explains the whole thing, who was involved and how it went down, and who the actual perpetrators are or were. The attempted assassination of Reagan. There was a presidential secession drill going on at the very same time, and the Bush son brother Neil was meeting with Hinckley's brother the next day for lunch. So that clearly associates the Bush name with the attempt on Reagan. Then, of course, other deep events, as we're talking about today, Anthrax, 9/11, and the war in Afghanistan. There was a drill, or there was an exercise on that. It went on starting in the summer of 2001. It went live on October 6th, when the bombing of Afghanistan started. Now, the impetus for my presentation is the fact that one of the persons who died, he was actually the first one. He's from Florida. He was a photo editor at The Sun magazine, which is in the same building as the National Enquirer. His family brought a suit against the government for negligence for allowing the anthrax bacteria or spores to be produced at Dugway. In mid-July of this year, 2011, the Injustice Department filed court papers stating that, quote, the facilities at Fort Detrick did not have the equipment necessary to produce this weaponized form of anthrax. And this weaponized form of anthrax was the most sophisticated bioweapon ever devised. Again, these were dry spores. They had a silicon oxide component that was inside the spore coat, or in the spore coat inside the exosporium. And this is what made this anthrax so dispersible. It wouldn't stick to anything. Again, the particles were 1.5 to 3 microns. There were 1 trillion spores per gram. One spore weighs 1/1,000,000,000 of a gram. There's 32 grams in an ounce. So you can get an idea of the weight of these spores. And so this was a bioweapon. So based on this fact that the facilities didn't exist at Fort Detrick to make this Amerithrax, the case against Bruce Ivins collapsed. There were 2 articles right after this, and they were the result of a headline in McClatchy News about this court filing by the Injustice Department. Justin Raimondo on Antiwar.com and Glenn Greenwald at Salon.com, both of whom had written a number of articles about Amerithrax in the past. And this whole thing is about a confluence of sinister entities, the intelligence community, secret societies, and Wall Street. And I urge people to really delve into the secret societies, because then that opens up a whole door into who these people are, how they're connected to Wall Street and the intelligence community. And at the top of it all is the banksters. They're the manipulators of everything.
Forward TV. The world is thinking.
What happened in 9/11 is we didn't have a strategy, we didn't have bipartisan agreement, we didn't have American understanding of it, and we had instead a policy coup in this country. A coup. A policy coup. Some hard-nosed people took over the direction of American policy, and they never bothered to inform the rest of us. I went through the Pentagon 10 days after 9/11. I couldn't stay away from Mother Army. I went back there to see Don Rumsfeld. I'd worked for him as a White House fellow in the 1970s. All this is in the book. And I said, "Am I doing okay on CNN?" He said, yeah, fine. He said, "I'm thinking about it." He says, "I read your book," and he said, this is a book that talks about the Kosovo campaign, and he said, "I just want to tell you," he said, "nobody's going to tell us where or when we can bomb. Nobody." He said, "I'm thinking of calling this a floating coalition. What do you think about that?" I said, "Well, sir, thanks for reading my book, and, he said, "Thanks, that's all the time I've got." Really. And I went downstairs. I was leaving the Pentagon, and an officer from the Joint Staff called me into his office and said, I want you to know," he said, "sir, we're going to attack Iraq." And I said, "Why?" He said, "We don't know." He said, I said, "Well, did they tie Saddam to 9/11? He said, "No." He said, "But I guess they don't know what to do about terrorism, and so they think, but they can attack states, and they want to look strong, and so I guess they think if they take down a state, it will intimidate the terrorists. And, you know, it's like that old saying," he said, "if the only tool you have is a hammer, then every problem has to be a nail." Well, I walked out of there pretty upset, and then we attacked Afghanistan. I was pretty happy about that. We should have. And then I came back to the Pentagon about 6 weeks later. I saw the same officer. I said, why haven't we attacked Iraq? We still going to attack Iraq?" He said, "Oh, sir," he says, "it's worse than that." He said, he pulled up a piece of paper off his desk. He said, "I just got this memo from the Secretary of Defense's office. It says we're going to attack and destroy the governments in 7 countries in 5 years. We're going to start with Iraq, and then we're going to move to Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and Iran." I said, 7 countries in 5 years. I said, "Is that a classified memo?" He said, "Yes, sir." I said, "Well, don't show it to me." He was about to show it to me. He said, "Because I want to talk about it." And I sat on this information for a long time, for about 6 or 8 months. I was so stunned by this, I couldn't begin to talk about it. And I couldn't believe it would really be true, but that's actually what happened. These people took control of the policy in the United States. And I realized then, it came back to me, a 1991 meeting I had with Paul Wolfowitz. You know, in 2001 he was Deputy Secretary of Defense, but in 1991 he was the Undersecretary of Defense for Policy. It's the number 3 position in the Pentagon. And I had gone to see him when I was a 1-star general. I was commanding the National Training Center. I had met him one time. He said, "If you ever get to Washington, come look me up." They always say that. Well, I was there in Washington. It was a Friday afternoon. I'd visited Colin Powell. He'd given me 5 minutes of his precious time and sent me on my way, and I was bored in the Pentagon, and I thought, I'll just go, who can I see? I think I'll see Wolfowitz. So I called, and up there he was available. Scooter Libby came to the door. I met Scooter for the first time, and he brought me in, and I said to Paul, I said, and this is 1991, I said, "Mr. Secretary, you must be pretty happy with the performance of the troops in Desert Storm." And he said, "Well, yeah," he said, but not really." He said, "Because the truth is we should have gotten rid of Saddam Hussein, and we didn't." And this was just after the Shia uprising in March of 91, which we had provoked, and then we kept our troops on the sidelines and didn't intervene. And he said, "But one thing we did learn," he said, "we learned that we can use our military in the region, in the Middle East, and the Soviets won't stop us." He said, "And we've got about 5 or 10 years to clean up those old Soviet client regimes, Syria, Iran, Iraq, before the next great superpower comes on to challenge us." And it was like, you know, I'm coming out of the Mojave Desert. I've been training troops. I haven't been thinking geostrategy for some time. And suddenly a guy just sort of shoves this nugget at you. Well, you remember it. It was a pretty stunning thing. You mean the purpose of the military is to start wars and change governments? It's not to sort of deter conflict? We're going to invade countries? And you know, my mind was spinning. And I put that aside. It was like a nugget that you hold on to. This country was taken over by a group of people with a policy coup. Wolfowitz, and Cheney and Rumsfeld, and you could name a half dozen other collaborators from the Project for a New American Century. They wanted us to destabilize the Middle East, turn it upside down, make it under our control. It went back to those comments in 1991. Now, did anybody ever tell you that? Was there a national dialogue on this? Did senators and congressmen stand up and denounce this plan? Was there a full-fledged American debate on it? Absolutely not. And there still isn't. And that's why we're failing in Iraq. Because Iran and Syria know about the plan. All you have to do is read the Weekly Standard and listen to Bill Kristol, and he blabbermouths it all over the world. Richard Pearl the same way. They could hardly wait to finish Iraq so they could move into Syria. It was like a laydown. Oh, our legions are going to go in there. This wasn't what the American people voted George Bush into office. Well, they didn't actually vote him into office, but it wasn't what many of the people who... It wasn't what he campaigned on. He campaigned on a humble foreign policy, the most arrogant foreign policy in American history. He campaigned on no peacekeeping, no nation building, and here he is with Afghanistan and Iraq. It's astonishing. So the root of the problem is not how many troops are in Iraq. Please believe me. Don't be mad, if you're a Democrat, at your Democratic congressman because they can't reduce the troops and frustrate the president. That's not the issue. And if you're a Republican, don't be mad at the Democrats because they're fussing with the troops. Whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, if you're an American, you ought to be concerned about the strategy of the United States in this region. What is our aim? What is our purpose? Why are we there? Why are Americans dying in this region? That is the issue.
The material that I'm using for this presentation came from two radio interviews on Guns and Butter, which is an excellent online show. It's KPFA in Berkeley. The moderator is Bonnie Faulkner, who's just a great person. She has great people on her show. And a year and a half ago, in March of 2010, she had Barry Kissanon, who wrote this memo that I mentioned earlier to Rush Holt, and who's been studying the U.S. biowarfare program for many years and is an expert on it. He was interviewed to talk about the anthrax that came in this attack, and he talked about how it's connected to the biowarfare program, where it was made, and the nature of it. And that, again, that interview was in the month of March in 2010 on Guns and Butter, KPFA Berkeley. So if you just Google Guns and Butter, KPFA, you'll get to their archives, go back to March of 2010. This show has just numerous interviews that are excellent. The other interview occurred on July 20th of this year, 2011, with Dr. Graham McQueen, who has been on the faculty at McMaster University in Canada for around 30 years. He was in the religion department, and then he started their peace studies program 10 or 15 years ago. And during the early part of 2001, he was involved in a workshop that took place actually in Pakistan, but it was at an Afghan university in Pakistan, about what to do in Afghanistan because they were coming out of 30 years of war, and they were trying to plan for things. And it involved people who had been in the government of Afghanistan. There were academics, former government and cabinet officials, 10% were women, and there were a few Taliban in this group. It was a week-long workshop. They were brainstorming on ideas. During this workshop, a delegation of Taliban came to listen to their ideas and to present their ideas. in a perfectly normal manner. Towards the end of the week, one attendee stood up and stated that the U.S. was going to invade Afghanistan to build permanent military bases because negotiations with the Taliban for a gas pipeline from the Caspian region had fallen through. And if you saw Fahrenheit 9/11, Michael Moore's movie, he talked about it in there. There was an article in Asia Times, which is a Far East newspaper. Pepe Escobar writes for them. He has all kinds of great articles. He wrote about this. It was known well prior to 9/11 that the U.S. was going to invade Afghanistan and build permanent military bases. So Rand McQueen didn't know what to make of this, and so shortly after, after the program ended, he went back to McMaster University, went back to work, and then 9/11 happened, and then Anthrax happened. And then Afghanistan was invaded. And he just was floored. He said, I've got to study this. So he went into, I guess, a sabbatical to study the whole thing. And he looked at 9/11 and Anthrax and to see what, if there were any connections between the two events, because they were only a week apart. And then, again, the second attack was 4 weeks after 9/11. There were structural similarities. 9/11, they blamed Arabs and Muslims. Anthrax, they blamed Arabs and Muslims. 9/11 was an attack on the body of the nation. Anthrax was an attack on human bodies. They hate our freedoms, they said, for both. In 9/11, the blood of the perpetrators must be spilled to rub out their contamination of the national spirit. And under Anthrax, the blood of Muslims must be spilled to rub out this contamination of our bodies. And he cites the second verse of the national anthem, in which that specific thing is talked about in one of the part of the verse, of how the blood of the perpetrators must be spilled in order to rub out their contamination. The evidence for the connection, and that's the letters. The letters are dated 9/11, so automatically they're connected to 9/11. It was a slanted print, death to America, death to Israel, Allah is great. So this is basically a Hollywood script, very clear. A person who's a friend of mine had a girlfriend at the time of 9/11 who was a PhD in language arts. She had taught English as a second language for many years. When she saw these letters, she took one look at them and said, these letters are fake, they're cooked up, there's something going on here. And she really knew nothing about exercises, 9/11, or anything. This is only a week after 9/11 that she saw this, and she knew right away that Anthrax was cooked up because the letters were obviously faked. And my belief is that those letters came from an exercise that occurred during the month of June of 2001, in which there was a scenario of a smallpox attack on the U.S. by Iraq. The story fell apart quickly. The Anthrax story fell apart quickly because it was weaponized anthrax, and therefore the hijackers, who this was initially pinned on because of this its association with 9/11, they had no access to something like this. And what had happened was the science and the press got ahead of the perpetrators. It got out that it was weaponized anthrax and that it was clearly produced in the U.S. biowarfare program because it was the AIM strain, and that was known to come from the U.S. And the places where it was produced could be produced were Dugway and Battelle Labs. So this connection with the hijackers fell apart quickly. The next thing they did, and the perpetrators of this Amerithrax attack, when that fell apart, a rumor surfaced that it contained bentonite. Now, bentonite was supposed to be the signature of Saddam Hussein in Iraq, that it was in their anthrax. Somehow the Armed Forces Institute of Pathology, which is the arbiter of all pathologic slides in the U.S. and probably the world, because they're the ones that any pathologist sends slides to for second opinions when there's a question about what's the diagnosis on the slide. They got the specimen, looked at it, and said there wasn't any bentonite. And it was probably very easy to do. All it would take would be a chemical reaction. You take some chemical, drop it on the Amerithrax, and look for a color change that would occur if there was bentonite in it. And the color change didn't occur, therefore it didn't have bentonite. It couldn't have been used by the hijackers. So therefore, by definition, it became an inside job, and that's exactly what happened. Around a few months after the attack, the head of Homeland Security, Tom Ridge, ex-governor of Pennsylvania, said, this is looking like it's an inside job. And so they had to find a lone nut patsy to blame. So they first went after this Stephen Hatfield, who had long-standing intelligence and biowarfare connections in Africa. And as I mentioned before about this rebellion in Zimbabwe, when the people of Zimbabwe overthrew the Rhodesian government, 10,000 people of the rebels came down with anthrax. And Stephen Hatfield was over there in the area. So he has long-standing connections. But he fought back. They didn't really have any evidence against him that could really pin it to him. He fought back, and he got several $1 million in a damage suit. So then the FBI went after Bruce Ivins. Bruce Ivins had been helping them, trying to help them find the perpetrators. He was a researcher at Fort Detrick. He worked with vaccines. When you work with vaccines, you work with live bacteria. You don't work with spores. Spores aren't susceptible to vaccines. Spores turn into bacteria when they get in your body, and that's what the vaccines prevent, is the actual bacterial infection. So he doesn't have any equipment or anything to make dry weaponized anthrax. So there was a huge contradiction. Eventually it came out it was dry anthrax. And so the case against Bruce Ivins had always been very shaky. But then, again, 2 months ago, July of 2011, the case collapsed. Now, there are historical parallels also that Dr. McQueen came up with. On 9/11, there were exercises, and before 9/11, there were exercises. There were several on 9/11. Now the number is up to, well up in double figures, the number of drills and exercises associated with 9/11. The anthrax, Amerithrax, there was an exercise that I mentioned before, Dark Winter, June of 2001, a smallpox attack blamed on Iraq using Muslim intermediaries. Now, many of the hijackers of 9/11 were in Florida. The first death from Amerithrax was in Florida, and that was this reporter a photo editor that I mentioned. The wife of the editor of the National Enquirer knew two of the hijackers. She was a real estate agent and got them a place to live. The offices of the Sun, where this photo editor worked, were in the same building as the National Enquirer. One of the hijackers had cutaneous anthrax, and this was not actually diagnosed until afterwards, after 9/11. This hijacker had gone to an emergency room during the summer in Florida with a skin infection. He was treated by the ER doctor with antibiotics. The FBI went back to this doctor after 9/11 to ask him to talk to him about this guy's infection. Now, how they came up with this fact that the hijacker had gone into an emergency room with cutaneous with a skin infection that they could pin anthrax on. I don't know how they came up with that, But they went to this doctor and said, well, didn't he have anthrax, or could it have been? And so the doctor said, well, yeah, I guess maybe he had anthrax. So that's what happened with that. So here you are, one of the hijackers has cutaneous anthrax. Then Mohammed Atta and other hijackers, they were getting flying lessons, and Mohammed Atta, who was an engineer, wanted to borrow money to start a crop dusting business. He wanted to buy a plane and convert it so that it could be a crop duster. And anthrax is spread in aerosol form. So there you are. You have a hijacker connected with a method to spread anthrax. That's called sheep dipping, or how to frame a patsy. It creates an identity of those to be blamed. Classic example is Lee Harvey Oswald in New Orleans, Mexico, and a firing range in Texas. Oswald was in New Orleans with this Hands-Off Cuba committee, but the Oswald in Mexico and at the firing range in Texas was a double. It was not actually Oswald. And the purpose of this sheep dipping is to make sure all who saw the patsy remembers them. So Mohammed Atta goes to the Department of Agriculture to apply for a $650,000 loan for a plane and conversion equipment to do crop dusting. He's interviewed by a Department of Ag official, and he makes an unbelievable scene. First of all, the official told him he's not eligible for the loan because he's not an American citizen. So he goes nuts. He threatens to come around the other side of the desk and cut her throat. This was the first thing that happened. And then it went on after that into just this incredible scene. And unbelievably, this lady, this official who is a woman, maintains her cool. After 9/11, a light bulb goes off with the Department of Ag official, and she goes to the media and the FBI and talks about this whole story. So Mohammed Atta was sheep-dipped to be remembered as someone who was attempting to get a method to spread anthrax. So Dr. McQueen then said, with all these similarities and connections, he decided to come up with a grid of possible perpetrators. And his grid has four sections. There's individuals or groups, and there's foreign or domestic individuals or groups. So foreign individuals were ruled out almost immediately. A foreign group, Al-Qaeda and Saddam, they were ruled out soon after because it was weaponized. It was a bioweapon produced from the AIM strain and had to come from either Battelle Memorial Labs outside of Columbus, Ohio, or Dugway Proving Grounds in Utah. So they went directly to the lone nut patsy. And so, again, that's first Hatfill and then later Bruce Ivins. Typical lone nuts from the past: Lee Harvey Oswald, James Earl Ray, Sirhan Sirhan, Arthur Bremer, Mark David Chapman, John Hinckley, and you can just Google the various assassinations and the names of these patsies and learn the stories of how the likelihood that these patsies did the deed are nil. The stories are all there. I mean, it's very easy to research this stuff on the internet and find out what actually happened. So you're left now with a domestic group. And this domestic group, of course, the media never considers this. No one ever considers this. A domestic group, a group within the government, it's impossible to consider them because your friends don't conspire. Only the evil enemies conspire. Of course, Saddam Hussein and Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda, they conspire because they're evil. But people from your own government don't conspire because they're good. And this is related to something called the corporate ruling group mind and the national faith. Corporate ruling group mind is something that a man named John McMurtry, who is a professor at Guelph University in Canada. He was on another Guns and Butter interview. Actually, it was 2 weeks prior to the Anthrax interview on Guns and Butter. John McMurtry was on there on the 10th of March of 2010, and that was a speech that he gave at the 9/11 Truth movement meeting in Toronto in 2004. And he gives this talk about the corporate ruling group mind. National faith is what David Ray Griffin says. National faith is something that's even bigger than religion. There's people have different religions within a country, but the national faith about the country itself is something that's higher up in the hierarchy than religion even. And it's the same thing. People just have this idea that the government can't conspire against the people because they're automatically thought to be good. And it's the result of mass media brainwashing. All the networks, CNN, Fox, NPR, PBS, etc., Time, Newsweek, and so therefore this domestic group is never considered. The corporate media is ruled by a few corporate behemoths and Rupert Murdoch. The public media, the alternative media, a good bit of that is controlled by large donors, which are the large foundations such as Ford, Rockefeller, etc., and those large donors limit what these alternative media outlets can say because they're donating the money. If they lose the money from them, then they go out of business. The other problem is Americans are couch potatoes and thinks politics and democracy is a spectator sport. They don't really get involved with trying to do things. And most important, Americans forget history. History is distorted by the mass media and shoved down the memory hole. And all you have to do is read 1984 to see what's going on there. So to summarize, 9/11 blamed on Saddam, Osama bin Laden. FBI has no evidence on Osama bin Laden. He was never on their 10 most wanted list for 9/11. Amerithrax blamed on Saddam, Osama bin Laden, hijackers. The FBI, when that fell apart, the FBI started a rumor that it contained bentonite, so it had to be Saddam Hussein. That fell apart because the Armed Forces Institute of Pathology evaluated a specimen and said there was no bentonite. So, and then the fact that Amerithrax is an industrial weapons-grade biological agent, and these foreign individuals and groups don't have any access to it, and so the domestic lone nut Patsy had to be found. That's fallen apart, and so now there's a final contradiction. 2 attempts to convict a Patsy have failed. Various pieces of the evidence connect the 2 events. Amerithrax had a preceding exercise, Dark Winter, which went live. There were other projects associated with Amerithrax, Clear Vision and Bacchus, and you can read about those in the Barry Kissin memo to Rush Holt. The 2 events are closely connected, and both are inside jobs. So, who is a domestic group potentially that could have done this? Did a planned motive and domestic group that satisfies the requirements exist? Yes. Do we know who they are? Yes. Motive and plan. A clean break, written by the neocons of Project for New American Century for Netanyahu back in the 90s when he was head of the Israeli government. It's a new strategy for securing the realm. Then there's the Grand Chessboard, a book by Zbigniew Brzezinski of the Council on Foreign Relations Trilateral Commission, who put war plans in a 1997 book, A Blueprint for World Dictatorship, as it was called by a former German defense minister. And this was for an invasion of Eurasia in order to control the world. The neoconservatives who wrote A Clean Break also were involved with Project for a New American Century, envisioning world empire based on military domination, required an invasion of Eurasia as laid out by Brzezinski and Grand Chessboard, but required a new Pearl Harbor. Therefore, 9/11 and Amerithrax. This neocon philosophy that they espouse comes from their connection to Leo Strauss of the University of Chicago and Hegel, who was a philosopher from Germany, I believe, from a few hundred years ago. Espouse Machiavellian principles. Leaders can and should lie to the people to achieve their goals. There's the Hegelian dialectic, synthesis, antithesis, and thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. And this is the shock doctrine. There's a book called The Shock Doctrine by Naomi Klein, which outlines this whole principle and what the shock doctrine is. They combine these to form false flag events, which is the shock or the thesis. They come up with an antithesis of what to do, and then they're able to bring through things that they could never get done, such as the Patriot/Traitor Act, as a result of the shock and awe, because people are terrified. Creates fear to mislead the public and achieve their goals, and this is basically this Machiavellian principle that's espoused by Leo Strauss and the neocons. That's how they operate. That's their MO. The shock and awe response plan, that was prepared prior to 9/11 in 1998. The Catastrophic Terrorism Study Group, headed by Robert Zelikow, who was the head of the 9/11 Commission. Anthrax was number 2 in the 1-2 punch of shock and awe, designed to usher in the invasion of Afghanistan and Central Asia. Iraq after Afghanistan, both of which had been planned years before in the Grand Chessboard, a clean break, and a strategy for Israel in the 1980s. And if you don't believe a domestic government group can conspire to kill Americans, the thing to do is Google Operation Northwoods, which was a plan to blame on Cuba the shoot down of an airliner with people in it, killing of people on the streets in U.S. cities, so that the island of Cuba could be invaded. So here we are, this world empire and world government envisioned by banksters from 2 centuries before was now on the verge of execution after these wars were started, and that's where we are. 9/11 cannot be looked at in a vacuum. Many events have occurred in my lifetime that have a common thread. Assassinations in the 60s, the Tonkin Gulf, war in Vietnam, attack on the Liberty, more assassinations, COINTELPRO, October Surprise. In the 70s, there were secret wars in Laos, Cambodia, Thailand. There was the first 9/11 in Chile, the Arab oil embargo, Watergate, the hostage crisis. In the 80s, there was another October Surprise, genocidal wars on Central and South America, Operation Condor, Iran-Contra, Iraq-Gate, the BNL scandal, more secret wars in various African countries, invasion of Panama, Mena, Arkansas, Contra arms for drugs operation. Then in the 90s, the Mena drug operation ongoing, Gulf War I, Waco, World Trade Center bombing number 1, Oklahoma City, war on the Balkans, and Seattle 99. Then in the 00s, it's 9/11, 7/7, and war after war after war after war after war without end. And that's where we are now. How are these events tied together? By the names of those individuals involved in these various events. And the most common name throughout all of this, it appears in every decade, is Bush. Prescott Bush and the plot to seize the White House. Just Google that. In the 1930s, they attempted to bamboozle a Marine general named Smedley Butler into using the World War I veterans group who had done the occupation of the Capitol Mall in the early 1930s when the Depression started to get their bonus, and they were going to use General Butler to take that army of veterans and take over the government. Prescott Bush is also traded with the enemy. Prescott Bush and Wall Street financed Hitler. There's a book that you can just Google, that you can read online. It's called Wall Street and the Rise of Hitler. And it's, all you have to do is Google that and read the book online. It's how Prescott Bush and all these Wall Street moguls financed Hitler. H.W. Bush, Bay of Pigs. His front company, Zapata, which ran the operation, the boats, the Barber, and the Houston. H.W., the JFK assassination. He is in a picture taken in front of the school book depository and has various false alibis for not being in Dallas on November 22nd, 1963. He also made a phone call to the FBI on that day and stated that there was some person who might have done it. He gave a specific name, as a matter of fact. H.W. Bush, Watergate. And to find the story on that, get Russ Baker's book, The Family of Secrets. And it's a book about the history of the Bush family from Prescott on. And in there's a couple of chapters on Watergate. And it shows how H.W. manipulated the whole thing and got rid of Nixon. It's just an amazing story. Watergate, what happened in Watergate, what everybody thinks about Watergate is a mirage. Russ Baker really shows us what actually happened. In the 80s, H.W. Bush is involved with everything. Iran-Contra, Iraq-gate, BNL scandal, BCCI scandal, you name it, the Reagan assassination attempt. He's connected with all of it, everything in the 80s. Wait, there's more. H.W., Gulf War I, incubator babies lie. Mena, Arkansas. There's a book called Bush, Clinton, and the CIA by a guy named Terry Reed, who was in the Air Force Security Service, which is the Air Force branch of NSA, and it's the counterpart of the ASA, which I was in during the Vietnam era, and he had been stationed in Vietnam and with the Air Force Security Service. But then he got involved he was a pilot, and he got involved teaching Nicaraguans how to fly twin-engine planes in Mena, Arkansas. And he was involved with that whole thing, and he wrote a book about it called Compromised, Bush, Clinton, and the CIA. Compromised, C-O-M-P-R-O-M-I-S-E-D. Just Google that. Terry Reed is the author. It's a great book. And it tells the connection between H.W. and Mena. Then there was Bush's cousin who announced on Fox News the morning after the 2000 election that W. had won Florida after Florida had already been called for Gore because of the exit polls. The exit polls called the state for Gore. This Bush cousin was on a 1-month contract to Fox News. And he was only on for that month. And he goes on and announced that W won Florida when he didn't. The Shrub, during the weekend of the JFK Jr. assassination. And the thing you want to watch on that is on a website called Brass Check TV. And you go to Brass Check TV, and just Google that and go to their assassination section, and it has a number of videos about various assassinations, and one of them is JFK Jr. and it tells the whole story. W disappeared on the weekend of that JFK Jr. died. He had just lost the Iowa primary. He came to and the New Hampshire primary was the Tuesday after JFK Jr. died, and W, who's desperate in the election in this primary, disappears that weekend, the prime time for campaigning. He's gone. Nobody knows where he is to this day, and he doesn't turn up until Monday, after the whole thing is over. And then there's Marvin Bush, another Bush brother. He was on the board of directors on the company that did security for the World Trade Center complex. The Bushes are agents of the banksters. They are the crime family of America. And I have a link here on this slide that you can go to read about the Bush crime family. So, what you have to understand, as I said before, 9/11 cannot be looked at in a vacuum. And what I call it is the fusion factor. All of these events, 9/11, assassinations, Iran-Contra, etc., have a common thread and are therefore fused together. The same people are behind all of these events. A single explanation for them makes much more sense than multiple different explanations. In other words, the multiple patsies for the assassination doesn't make sense. If you have a single explanation that explains all the assassinations and all these other events, that is what actually did it. And that's using something called Occam's razor, which David Ray Griffin talks about in his analysis of 9/11. There's all these explanations for what happened on 9/11, but if you look at David Ray Griffin's explanation, it explains all of it, and that's using Occam's razor. So where are we headed? We're headed to World War III and war forever for empire. It's just like the Star Wars movies. You can look at those series of movies, starting with Episode 1 going all the way through to Episode 3 and the emergence of Darth Vader, who morphed from Anakin Skywalker, and the archetype there, of course, is the Antichrist. You break up Iraq into pieces. Who benefits? Follow this link to a short clip of Dahlia Wasfi, who testified at the Winter Soldier II hearings, and she talks about who benefits from this invasion of Eurasia. You create chaos throughout the Middle East, Africa. That's the Arab Spring. You invade Libya, recolonize Africa, move AFRICOM from Stuttgart to Africa, and now we have widespread war throughout Africa in numerous countries. And that's what's going on right now. So we're headed into World War III. Invasion of Libya was key. It provided the land bridge to Eurasia as laid out by Brzezinski in the Grand Chessboard. And so that these two continents can be controlled. That's what Hitler was trying to do in World War II. That's why he was in Libya. He was in northern Africa. He was going to do a pincher's movement coming up through the land bridge, through Saudi Arabia, into southwestern Russia, into the Caspian region, into the oil fields, and he was coming from the west, from Germany, through the west and northwest of Russia, and they were going to join up in this pincher's movement on all the resources in Central Asia. So we're doing the same thing that Hitler did. And now the other thing about Libya is that it was started without any kind of protocol that's required by the Constitution to start a war. The president can now start wars whenever and wherever they want without going to Congress. All they have to do is say we have to have humanitarian bombing, and they can start a war. The war for global empire has now begun. The next stage, there will be a nuclear 9/11 to be blamed on Iran and or Pakistan. Martial law will be declared. Dissidents will be rounded up and put in FEMA concentration camps that have already been built by Halliburton. Continuity of government. Planning for that began in 1980 by who else? The neocons, Rumsfeld, Cheney, Wolfowitz et al., who were not in government at the time. Ollie North set it up. During the Iran-Contra hearings, Representative Jack Brooks of Texas tried to interrogate him during the Iran-Contra hearings, and Senator Inouye cut him off. Details can be found by going to this following link. Understanding Deep Politics. It was a conference held in Santa Cruz, California in May of 2010. Peter Dale Scott did a whole talk on this continuity of government. And and how everything was set up, starting in 1980, going up until 9/11. Numerous wars and presidential directives were handed down, or numerous laws and presidential directives were put together over this period of 30 years, or almost, 20 years, coming up to 9/11, so that the continuity of government can go through the way they wanted it. 9/11 triggered continuity of government. Cheney disappeared for an extended period. Northcom installed in the defense of the fatherland. On 9/11, NORAD intercepts were under the vice president, per continuity of government dictates. The plane carrying the missile was able to fly right over the Pentagon and release the missile. And the link on that is citizeninvestigationteam.com. They have a whole film on the plane approaching 9/11, approaching the Pentagon, rather. The banksters are behind all of it. How do we know this? The invasion of Libya is key. The first thing the rebels did was bomb the central bank of Libya. Then they opened up a central bank for the rebels in Benghazi, which is controlled by the banksters. The central bank of Libya that was under Gaddafi had 144 tons of gold in it. Where that is now, I don't know, but they had more gold than the government of Greece, who had 110 tons of gold. So think about it. A group of rebels, 2 days after their rebellion officially starts, and the NATO is helping them, they form a central bank. I mean, whoever has ever done this in a previous rebellion? Did Ho Chi Minh go to Europe and open up a central bank? How about Castro or Hugo Chavez? When they had their rebellions, did they go to Europe and open up a central bank? No. World War III was predicted 140 years ago by Albert Pike, who was a Confederate general. The First World War must be brought about in order to permit the Illuminati, which is the banksters, that's who they are, to overthrow the power of the czars in Russia, which was done by one of the Warburgs, who spent millions of dollars to have the czars assassinated, and the making of that country a fortress of atheistic communism. The divergences caused by the agents of the Illuminati, and that was the leaders of Russia, between the British and Germanic empires, will be used to foment this war. At the end of the war, communism will be built and used in order to destroy other governments and in order to weaken the religions. World War II. The Second War must be fomented by taking advantages of the differences between the fascists and the political Zionists. This war must be brought about so that Nazism is destroyed and the political Zionism be strong enough to institute a sovereign state of Israel in Palestine. During the Second World War, international communism must become strong enough in order to balance Christendom, which would be then restrained and held in check until the time when we would need it for the final social cataclysm. The Third World War must be fomented by taking advantage of the differences between the agentur of the Illuminati, between the political Zionists and the leaders of the Islamic world. The war must be conducted in such a way that Islam, the Muslim Arabic world, and political Zionism, the State of Israel, mutually destroy each other. Meanwhile, the other nations, once more divided on this issue, will be constrained to fight to the point of complete physical, moral, spiritual, and economical exhaustion. We shall unleash the nihilists and the atheists, and we shall provoke a formidable social cataclysm which in all its horror will show clearly to the nations the effect of absolute atheism, origin of savagery, and the most bloody turmoil. Then everywhere the citizens obliged to defend themselves against the world minority of revolutionaries will exterminate those destroyers of civilization, and the multitude, disillusioned with Christianity, whose deistic spirits will from that moment be without compass or direction, anxious for an ideal, but without knowing where to render its adoration, will receive the true light through the universal manifestations of the pure doctrine of Lucifer. brought finally out in the public view. This manifestation will result from the general reactionary movement which will follow the destruction of Christianity and atheism, both conquered and exterminated at the same time. Who has run afoul of the banksters in the past? Andrew Jackson. His famous last words, "I killed the bank." That was the banksters' central bank that they tried to establish in the U.S. He ended their charter. Their assassination attempt failed. There were 2 pistols by this assassin he used to try and kill Andrew Jackson. They both misfired. He was tried, went to jail for a while, and he said that he was paid by European banksters. Lincoln, he refused to pay the 37% interest the banksters wanted to pay for the Civil War. So he went back to Washington, had a confab with his Treasury people, and they decided to print the greenbacks, which paid for the Civil War. It was paper money. It worked fine, and he was able to pay for the Civil War with that. Then he was assassinated by John Wilkes Booth, who was an agent, who was a Rothschild agent. That came out much later, and documentation found in the 20th century that Booth was a Rothschild agent. JFK, among other transgressions, he issued silver certificates outside the control of the Federal Reserve, and the Rothschild agents H.W. Bush and David Rockefeller had him murdered. What is happening in the USA these days? The bankers have hijacked the government. The SEC, the Treasury Department, the Injustice Department, the White House, all have been completely infiltrated by Goldman Sachs, Wall Street criminals, and the banksters, and their cronies in the government are sucking the lifeblood out of 98% of the population, and that's why there's this uprising on Wall Street that's spreading across the country. It is absolutely clear what is happening.
Well, a few minutes ago I spoke to Nassim Taleb, author of the influential Black Swan theory of unpredictable events. Just a few months back on Newsnight, he used this theory to warn of civil unrest on the streets of London, which of course came to pass. Well, I start by asking whether world recession would be his next prediction.
I don't think that it's the bad news would be a recession. I think the bad news is that not figuring out what got us here and continuing to commit the same mistake. Too much debt and too much of what we call the agency problem on the part of the financial system. And let me explain what the agency problem is. The tumor at the center of the system that has not been removed. It's when someone makes money and gets a bonus, and when they lose money, we pay the price. The taxpayers, the future generations in this case. So the core of the problem is that asymmetry in payoff, making, socializing losses and privatizing the gain, and that generator of that iniquity is still there.
You're basically saying the banks got away with it, are you?
What has happened? Since the crisis, these people got us here, and they're reaping the benefits. As an industry, they have not suffered, okay? You have people in the streets, unemployed people. We have the Federal Reserve doing everything to finance these bonuses. This is, I'm outraged.
So what do you think actually needs to happen then to the banks that you think have gone uncharted?
Well, the first time we bailed out the banks was in 1982, in 1983, during the Reagan years. And they said, okay, this should never happen again. But the fact that they bailed out the banks then, in 87 again, and they kept repeating it, gave the banks the feeling that they could hijack society to extract that it's a bonus system that's extremely sneaky in the sense that they know if they make a mistake, someone else pays for it, but when they make the money, they get the benefits.
Well, what would you make of...
In 2008, when they bailed out the banks once, again, they should have set the grounds to remove that problem. They did not. The banks today have hijacked the government. It's like inverse of what the French did. They socialized the banks in 1981, while here it's like the banks took over the government in the U.S.
Well, let me just ask you something. What would you make of the Bank of England here, the stability chief, arguing that actually banks need to be taking more risk, not less, to get us out of recession? That's what he advocates.
It's not whether the banks should be taking more risk or less risk. The banks should be something other than machines to generate themselves bonuses. Okay, the banks should be something that like more like a utility. We are bailing them out because they're a utility. Otherwise, we'd let them die, like other businesses, like the car industry, like other businesses. We should remove that problem. It has not been addressed. Today, the banks are vastly more centralized than they were before the crisis. They are much more powerful than they were before. They have an incredibly sneaky lobby in Washington, and it looks like every monetary policy we have had in the United States for the past 10 years was there to accommodate them, and today more than ever.
But surely
we
you're
have
not just
solved
saying
the problems that got us here.
Yeah, but surely you're not just saying that the world economic woes we're looking at the moment are all down to a bank bonus, are you?
No, it's because the monetary policies that we are engaging in the United States, putting interest rates at zero, seems to just do nothing but supply banks with cheap money. That's it.
So what should
Nothing else.
change? What should change then in terms of the policy now?
We should have, the first thing we should have done is try to remove the cancer by working on lowering indebtedness in society, particularly in the United States. We lost 3.5 years, okay? We should have started the process very early, transform debt to equity. I mean, it's like a country cannot survive on air. Money is air. You print money, it's air. Okay, you need to do something other than just print money and create public liabilities.
But the aim of this is to get growth back into the economy, surely.
The word growth to me, okay, by itself is meaningless. It's like saying speed, okay? You need safety before growth, okay? Pseudo-growth. Madoff had growth. A Ponzi scheme generates growth. That's not the growth we want. We want something sustainable, something robust, something effective. And people who talk about growth without robustness, okay, are not acting responsibly. It's like growth that's going to make the system collapse in 2 or 3 years is not the growth we want. We want to clean up the system. We wasted 3 years doing nothing but transferring money into the pockets of bankers.
Nassim Taleb, thanks very much indeed. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me.
Who is doing this for them? Obama. He is Rosemary's Baby in reverse. His famous grandmother was the bag lady for all the Asian dictators during the 60s and 70s. His mother seduced his father in Africa. They hopped on a plane to Hawaii, and he was born at the home of the DARPA Mind Control Project at the University of Hawaii. Shortly thereafter, his mother divorces his father, goes to Indonesia, and marries a CIA asset who helped supply the lists of those to be assassinated by Kopassus. The smoking gun of 9/11 is Anthrax. They are joined at the hip. Anthrax was an inside job, therefore 9/11 was an inside job. The banksters have hijacked the government, they've hijacked Congress, they've hijacked everything. And people are in the streets, and right now it's going on in Wall Street. They're occupying Wall Street, right now.
Right, and it's
not news.
It's not covered at all.
It's not covered at all. Nothing there is about it. And that's what's happening. And the cops are arresting all these people who are trying to bring attention to the problem. And the press is not paying attention.
Yeah.
So I think that's it. Any questions? I can open this up for questions.
I have a question about the exercises that, why would they, not that I don't believe it, I'm just questioning why would they, what's their purpose of doing it at the same time as they're pulling off the event?
Well, in the case of, say,
the London bombing, the subway bombing, you were saying they were actually carrying out the exercises.
what it does is it confuses things, and the people who are supposed to respond don't respond. And that's what happened on 9/11.
Yeah.
I mean, 9/11, see, there's one military person here that I know who knows that what NORAD is supposed to do when a plane gets hijacked. It's only 4 numbers that the pilot has to punch in. It only takes, a couple seconds to, I believe it's 7,700, 1, 2, 3, 4. I mean, you just punch in the numbers, that goes direct to air traffic control, and they know you're hijacked. And that could have been done immediately when they were hijacked. I mean, it doesn't take anything. Colleague in the back.
At 9/11, I also heard something about Cheney being present They had no red paper. So
Well, he was right. He was directing the orders on. There was a plane approaching the Pentagon. I mean, there's missile batteries all over Washington D.C. There's missile batteries all around the Pentagon, and this plane is approaching, and this E6 guy or E7 just keeps asking Cheney, "Have the orders changed?"
Right.
And it's in the Norman Mineta testimony, which was kept out of the 9/11 Commission. All you have to do is just Google Norman Mineta testimony 9/11, and this thing will come up. And Mineta was there when it happened, and the sergeant keeps coming every few minutes. He keeps coming to Cheney. He says, have the orders changed? And he keeps saying no. And so this plane is coming closer and closer and closer and closer. And it gets to 10 miles out. And he comes again. He says, have the orders changed? And Cheney, the description Mineta gives is he whips his head around and says, have you heard that they've changed? No, they haven't changed.
Wow.
And the thing came right in. And if you go to something, if you just Google 9/11 pilots, or pilots for 9/11 truth, and you go to you'll find a website called CITinvestigationteam.com, and they have a film in which they interview 2 policemen and several other people who saw this plane come in, and they describe where it went and what happened to it. And one of the people is the guy on the other side of the Pentagon who saw this plane, who was on the opposite side, and he was in a loading dock. And he heard this explosion, and he jumps up and runs. It's a big, it's a loading dock. It's probably the opening as big as this wall here, or bigger. And he's only 5 steps away from it. He runs out, and as he runs out, this plane goes over the parking lot and on and on.
Oh, yeah.
radio control.
So, yeah. So there was no plane. The plane.
No, it was a plane. It flew over, but it didn't hit the building.
Right.
We've never seen a
That's
film of a
obvious.
plane hitting the
Anybody
building.
can-
There's no film of a plane hitting the building. All you see is this probably less than 5-second thing.
Yeah.
There's a blur and an explosion, and that's all you see. And you can find out, there's what I would go to find out more about what happened in the Pentagon. Google Jesse Ventura 9/11 Pentagon, and it's a 40-minute show. His show has been taken off the air, by the way.
I've seen that one. It was on.
And he hasn't. He's not on. You're saying he is on now?
No, I see it.
Yeah, right.
That one you're talking about.
Yes, it's a 40-minute show. Jesse Ventura, it's conspiracy theory. It's this program they used to have. Now it's no longer on TV, and it was on cable, and it tells what happened to the Pentagon.
Wasn't there a woman an employee who filed suit because she had unprecedented orders to just go straight to work without dropping her kid off?
Oh yeah, right. Well, she was I believe a Spec 4 in the Army, and she was right there, but she was far enough away that the explosion did not kill her or her baby.
Yeah.
She was dazed and stunned, and she walked out this area where the explosion was, carrying her baby in a daze. She got outside. She said she didn't see any plane parts. She said she thought it was a bomb.
Talk about the whistleblowers and the experts speak out. AE 9/11 Truth.
Okay, let's see. Now, I didn't see the whole film, so I can't really say. But let me just get these questions.
How do you see this progressing? Do you see, I personally see a revealing coming. I mean, it seems to be reaching some kind of critical mass. But that might just be because I'm so involved in watching videos and...
Most people don't have a clue.
I know, but I want to ask our presenter what he thinks, where we're going.
I don't know. They just had, hearings up in Toronto. They have hearings in Toronto every year. It was at Ryerson University. They're going to have it was streamed live. They're going to have a DVD that comes out, and that'll come out at some point.
I've just joined Architects and Engineers. Not joined. I signed that petition. But I was most impressed at any one website of the Architects and Engineers. There's now approximately 1,600 licensed architects and engineers. And
the buildings.
the
Building 7 is the other thing.
15, Building 7 seems to be the easiest entry for anybody to watch, to spend 5 minutes or 30 seconds watching that building fall.
There's 2 Achilles heels, and it's Building 7 and it's Anthrax and Building 7. Those are the 2 Achilles heels.
What's going on with that?
Let me get that.
There are other things. I was in the center on 9/11. I saw the first object that hit the North Tower. It was not a 767. At first I thought it was a small plane. Now I'm beginning to think drone. It was black. I saw that as coming from the fires. That's what blackened it. I'm now thinking that it was, many of the drones are black. If you look on Lockheed Martin, on their website, they'll show you their newest drones. They've been making drones for 50 years. They have drones that change shape as they fly. It's like really a scary thing. And it's on their own website. But I saw it, I heard the explosions. The plane was hanging out, or whatever it was, for at least a minute. That's why I got to see it as I went out the north side. They confiscated all cameras in that area. So you're not going to see pictures of that. Okay, and the other thing that's not mentioned very often is Lockheed Martin again. They had 2 people on the PNAC. One of them, Thomas Donnelly, wrote Rebuilding American Defenses in 2000, where he said, we need all this money for the defense budget. We're unlikely to get it unless we have a new Pearl Harbor. So, I mean, you can tie Lockheed Martin into much of this. They also had a private army, MPRI, which is bigger than Blackwater. They had their own private intelligence agency. And the thing about privatized armies and intelligence agencies, which many people don't realize, is not like the old days when they'd have to be off in the third world somewhere. They share military bases with our regular military bases in the U.S. They share the CIA building, so they have access to everything. And so they're in a position where they could have done it. Again, we need a new investigation. I mean, that has to be one of our chief things. And my hypothesis right now is Lockheed Martin. Where that ties in with the banks, you can make those connections, because everybody needs funding. But anyway, check out Lockheed Martin.
My involvement and interest in this has been not as strong as yours in the sense that I haven't done the research and the homework and so on. It's more like an intuitive look at it from afar sort of thing. And really, I mean, since the Oklahoma bombings, it just sort of snapped for me like, what is the result of all this? Who got everything they ever wanted for Christmas in this deal? And it's the military-industrial complex has gotten everything they've ever wanted for Christmas in this deal. And, President Eisenhower, a Republican military man, closed his presidency by warning us about this. This is nothing new. We were warned about this long before it started to happen. And I found this interesting quote. Let me read this to you. Voice or no voice, the people can always be brought to the bidding of the leaders. That is easy. All you have to do is tell them they are being attacked and denounce the pacifists for lack of patriotism and exposing the country to greater danger. It works the same in any country. Does anybody know who said that?
Adolf Hitler.
It was Hermann Göring, second in command of the
So
Third
that's the key. You have the 1-2 punch, shock and awe. There's a book called The Shock Doctrine, written by Naomi Klein, that describes this. It's done to people and it's done to countries. It was done to prisoners who were rounded up in the wars, these terror wars in Afghanistan, Iraq. Everybody that's been rounded up, you shock them, you make them totally, just totally demoralize them, and then they do anything. And that's what this thing was, a 1-2 punch. And then ever since then, every once in a while we have another one of these terrorist incidents, and they're all cooked up. They're cooked up by the FBI. It's been in the new media recently that almost every one of these terrorist incidents in this country is done by the FBI. They pay somebody a lot of money. They get an informant who's maybe got a drug charge against them, and tell, we'll cut your sentence if you do this. They give them money. They go and find people who were easily led, who are poor, and they get them to say things on. They wire them up, and they get them to say dumb things on tape. They get it on tape, and then they say it's a terrorist incident. And almost every one of these that has happened has been cooked up like this by the FBI.
About 25 years ago, Warren Beatty made a very little-known movie called The Parallax View. If you haven't seen it, watch it.
I had one other interesting little tidbit. I can't speak for Leanne, but Leanne Montaigne, I don't know if any of you know her, we were dating at the time of the 9/11 thing, and she created Santa Fe's English as a Second Language program, and she's been teaching English as a second language for 20 years or 25 years or something. And those letters that were written, you know, that came out after the Anthrax attacks, they were very poorly written and supposedly from a non-English speaker. Well, you know, I don't want to speak for Leanne, but she's not really a conspiracy theorist, and she's not really that interested in any of this stuff. But as an English professor who deals with non-English speakers and their writing, as soon as she read, you know, they put those on TV, you know, and as soon as she saw it, she said, there is no way. She can really, I mean, she's like a master at recognizing. She said, there's no way those were written by non-English speakers. It's an attempt to fake that they were written by non-English speakers. She could tell the you know, from having years and years of experience with non-English speakers, she could just tell instantly they were fakes.
Oh, yeah, that's what I'm saying. I think they were using this dark winter exercise prior to the Anthrax. It was in just 2 months beforehand. And the thing is, it's got 9/11. 9/11/01 is right at the top, both the letters. That's the date. They weren't mailed then. We know that. I mean, they weren't mailed then. They were mailed later. But they got that, and that's this whole thing of tying the Anthrax to the hijackers. That is what they tried to do, and it didn't work. And it's very obvious.
And they're still in charge.
These two events are tied. They're joined at the hip. They're fused together. And one is an acknowledged, known, the FBI says so, it was an inside job. And so is the other one.
Everybody talks about the coming of the apocalypse. I believe in that, and I'll tell you why. Because that really, I think, technically means the revealing.
Yes.
Right.
And that's what's happening here in this room tonight, and what's going to happen in a very big way. The truth will be known eventually. The truth comes out. It always comes out. Try telling some lies in your life and living them and see how long you can keep it a secret. It's just the nature of existence.
Yes, that's exactly right. And there's another Jesse Ventura video that you should watch, and it's about the Denver airport and these underground tunnels in the city that is being built under the Denver airport, and there's tunnels that go to Cheyenne Mountain. And there's a movie, and a lot of the stuff is in the movies. I mean, there was a movie about the 9/11 attack before it happened. You can Google it up. And there was also this a show on The Simpsons. And it's got this part where they talk about going to New York, and they bring up this poster, and this is in 1998. And they bring up this poster, and it's got a 9 for $9 for some bus trip. And then there's the two towers, and they're sitting next to the 9.
Wow.
And it said 9/11. This is on The Simpsons in 1998.
Right. You got one question back there, blue dress.
Isn't it just easy to just follow where the money's being come from?
Oh yes, that's another thing. That's
banksters.
Because I mean, you know, you're saying that the anthrax is only in 2 places, so it's also who benefits from it.
Right.
Who makes
Banksters.
anthrax shots? Who makes all the equipment
Oh, yeah,
to
right.
detect in all the anthrax equipment? You know, and all this stuff was pushed out so quick. I was in the Army. I was in Kosovo for September 11. You know, like I received 6 anthrax shots. And you can go in and do your research on them. It's like you're pretty much destined to get like Lou Gehrig's disease, ALS, MS, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's.
Gulf War syndrome.
Shots, yeah, all those shots have so many different things that cause all those things. And if you look at that, there's at least 200,000 documented cases of Lou Gehrig's, MS, Alzheimer's, and Parkinson's that are directly linked back to those anthrax shots from the first Gulf War. You know, and that was, you know, back in 1991. you know, since then. You know?
Following the money.
It's ridiculous.
Following the money is exactly what you have to do. And this guy in this picture, his name is Splitting the Sky. He's a Mohawk Indian from Canada originally. He was a prisoner at Attica when they had the Attica uprising. And he had never used a computer before. He's an author. He wrote this book about Attica and what happened to him there. And he was in a hotel across the street from the towers 2 days before. He went to a bookstore. One of the Rockefellers paid for him to come there to present his book at this bookstore. And he was supposed to go and eat breakfast at the restaurant on top. And he suddenly got this bad feeling and decided to go. And the day of 9/11, he and his family packed up and they drove back up because he was supposed to speak somewhere up in Canada. And it happened. And he didn't find out about it until he got to where he was going, I think in Canada. And he heard about it, and he said right on the spot, it's an inside job. Soon after that, he started to research it, and he followed the money, and that's what he did. And he used Google. That is all he used was Google, and he followed the money, and he found out who did it. And those people, the people he found out were only the ones who were at the actual operational level. The people above them are the banksters. So just Google splitting the sky, follows the money. Get this video. It's an hour and a half, and he explains the whole thing, how he followed the money, and all the intricacies of who and what and where and why.
Okay.
Splitting the sky follows the money.
Wow, yeah.
It's just amazing. And he did it with Google, and nothing else.
One more.
I don't know if people started to become aware of Mike Gravel's 9/11 Initiative, Citizens Initiative.
What was that? Oh, Mike Gravel, yeah, I know that.
And I think he's onto something good there. I mean, and another government investigation is going to be a whitewash, just like the first one was. So he's starting this in Massachusetts. So he's got to get over 70,000 signatures. And he made a presentation at the Toronto hearing. But I guess his argument is that if they get it on the ballot and get enough people to say that they want a citizens' investigation of 9/11, then it starts to corner these guys in. If they have the investigation, they may not have the ability to, arrest people from the citizens' investigation. But if they come into Massachusetts, then they can do so.
Well, that's what Splitting the Sky tried to do, and this was last year. Bush went up there to give some speech, and he tried to arrest Bush. He said he had told the police about it beforehand. They said, "I want to arrest him." They have a law in Canada. People who are torturers, war criminals, cannot visit the country, and he tried to arrest him.
But there was an investigation this week. Talk about that.
Well, isn't it true Cheney can't go to certain countries?
Oh, yeah, right. These guys can't go to certain countries.
They'll be arrested on site for criminal war.
Bush cannot go to Europe. He was supposed to go to Europe to give some speech, and he had to cancel it because he couldn't go.
Yeah.
Because he might have gotten arrested.
There was a citizens' investigation in Canada this week.
Tell me, you mean
Not the Toronto hearing. You're not talking about the
Yeah, Toronto hearing.
Yeah, right. I mentioned that before.
Actually, my father was one of the panelists on the Toronto hearing.
Really?
Yeah.
This year?
Yeah.
We'll post a video on that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because I want to send a copy of this video to Dr. McQueen.
Well, that's how my father got involved, because
Very good.
Graham McQueen and he are friends from McMaster.
Really?
Oh, great.
That is incredible.
And he had not really done any research into it until about 3 or 4 weeks before, and he called me and I said, "What? You're doing what?" And
Your father called you, though.
yeah, to tell me what he was doing. And now I said, "I've been converted." And so is he.
Yeah.
They think they've made a real breakthrough. But
Well, this Anthrax thing is a key thing, because now, I don't know what's going to happen with this lawsuit. This lawsuit is ongoing by this family against the government. And the Justice Department said, well, he doesn't have the facilities there. Or where did it come from? So that's the big Achilles heel.